At the end of last week's Parsha, the beginning of this week's Parsha, there's a famous incident which is it requires a lot of thinking to understand. I think I talked about it a little bit at the Yeshivat Ohr. Let's take a look at page 875. This is the end of Parshas Balak, chapter 25 in the book of Numbers.
Sorry, did you say 875?
Yes, 875. Israel settled in the Shittim, it's a place, and the people began to commit harlotry with the daughters of Moab. They solicited them, the daughters of Moab did. They invited the people to the feasts of their gods. People ate and prostrated themselves to their gods. Israel became attached to Baal Peor, which is another type of idol worship of the time. And the wrath of Hashem flared up against Israel, that provoked God's anger. Hashem said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people, hang them before Hashem against the sun, and the flaring wrath of Hashem will withdraw from Israel. Now, if, as is customary, someone stops there and says, oh, I'm going to write my paper for the journals, here we are, the collective responsibility, you take the leaders and kill them for the sins of the people aren't guilty, and so on and so on. I can hear the whole testimony, definitely coming from Harvard. But now let's go on just a little bit. Moses said to the judges of Israel, let each man kill his men who are attached to Baal Peor. Is that related to what it says in verse 4? In verse 4, it says, Moses should take the leaders and kill them. Verse 5, it says, Moses says to the judges, go and get the people who committed the crime and kill them. So, and let's suppose that they do what it says in 5. But according to verse 4, that won't stop the plague. Because according to verse 4, to stop the plague, you have to kill the leaders. So clearly what it means is, in verse 4, take all the leaders of the people, okay, now you've got them together, right? And then hang the ones who were guilty of idol worship. Not them, the leaders, which is in fact what it says in verse 5. He tells the judges, who are the leaders, kill those who are attached to Baal Peor, to the idol worship. So it's just a question of using a little of logic to make a consistent picture and reading the next verse. I studied under Avdol, famous philosopher, Nelson Goodman, and he was criticized by someone else, and he wrote his answer less than one page in a famous journal of philosophy, and he called it, I'm reading to the end of the paragraph. He pointed out that the critic had taken something out of context, and if he had read the end of the paragraph, he wouldn't have been able to make his comment. It was really pretty devastating. And the critic was pretty well known. Okay, that's what happens in the terms of the general people. Now, behold, a man of the children of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman near his brothers in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the entire assembly of the children of Israel. Now, this guy, as we will see later, was a prince of the tribe of Shimon, and he was on his way to a tryst, as they say in literature. But he didn't just, sneak into his tent. No, he made a public demonstration of it. And he went in such a way that It was generally public, and the congregation here is the Sanhedrin, the leaders, the judges. He parading in front of everybody. Why is he doing that? And they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Why were they crying? Here's one of the many cases, the case is made that when you read the laws that are written in the Torah, you often cannot understand from the words in the Torah what to do. And this goes back to what I told you a couple of days ago, that the oral tradition came first and the written came afterwards. They already knew what to do. And the words written in the Torah are codification, it's official codification, or like Rav Hirsch says, lecture notes for people who were there at the lecture. What isn't as widely appreciated is that the narrative portions of the Torah have the same problem. Often the narrative portions describe an event, and either you don't know what the event is, or the text doesn't give you any clue why it happened, what its importance is. Here it just says they were crying. So the oral tradition fills in what was going on. He's taking this Midianite woman, and he's publicizing the fact that he's taking her to have a tryst. He comes to Moses and to the Sanhedrin, the leaders, and he says, "Tell me, gentlemen, is what I am going to do permissible or forbidden? And if you say it's forbidden, how did Moses marry a Midianite woman?" And we talked about this yesterday. But he comes and he presents this as his declaration against them. Why are they crying? I told you yesterday that it's a no-brainer, because Moses did it before the Torah was given, and now the Torah has already been given. They're crying because this kind of action should call forth some kind of response. And they weren't sure what it was. God, in fact, had communicated to them a response to the action, and they had lost it. Even Moses lost it. Now, if you ask, how could that be? How could it be that Moses would lose it and the people in Sanhedrin would lose it? Is that credible? Is that possible? We have many instances where HaKadosh Baruch Hu hid things from great people so as to enable other people to earn merit by what they do. In other words, let's take, for example, what's in this week's Parsha. The daughters of Slavchad, who want a portion of the land, and they ask Moses, our father died, and there were only girls, and if you tell me that girls don't stand in the place of their father, let our father do Yibum because he had no boys. Tell me that girls stand in the place of the father, give us the land. And Moses said, I don't know. And then God told him, which means that law came to us through the daughters of Slavchad. They were the trigger for that law. That gives them gigantic merit. They were the triggers for a law coming from God. God could have taught it to them beforehand, and when they come and ask the question, they say, okay, here it is, here's the answer. No. He wanted Moses' knowledge to come from their trigger. Similarly, when the people who, God says to them at the end of the first year in the wilderness to make a Korban Pesach, a Paschal sacrifice, and people come to Moses and say, we are tummy, we're defiled through contact with the dead. How come we're going to miss out? Why should we be missing from the performance and from the holiday and be excluded from the performance of the whole of the Jewish people? And Moses says, give me a half hour, I'll come back and I'll tell you what God wants. And God tells them about Pesach Sheni, that a month later, those who are Tamei at the time of the first Pesach can make another Pesach. Again, it's a law. God could have taught them that law on Sinai. And when they come to ask the question, they say, I'm glad you asked. It's on the record. Here it is. No. Moses got it through the fact that they asked the question. That puts them in a position of earning tremendous merit. So God can hide something from someone and even cause someone to forget something so as to give an opportunity for someone else to earn merit. So this story about Pinchas is a story where they knew it, they were taught it, and they forgot it because God wanted the event to to take place through Pinchas. Not only the event, but the memory of the lost law comes through Pinchas. And then Moses says to Pinchas, well, since you remembered it, you should carry it out. This is an element of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with people, with the Jewish people, and with the world. You had a question?
No, I was going to say, I bring up exactly like Pesach Sheni, that was it.
Okay, so it's the same thing. Okay, so now, what happened? I told you the other day, was it yesterday or on Shabbos, I can't remember, that Pinchas remembered the law, which nobody else remembered. And he says to Moses, you taught us, Kanoim Pogimbo, that they should be killed in action, not executed by a court after the action, but as long as they're still performing the crime, they should be killed. And Moses said, you remembered it, you should carry it out. And that means it wasn't a rage, as we said before. Now, when he's introduced in verse 7, it says, Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen. So, so we know who this is. This is Pinchas, the son of Aaron, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, Aaron's grandson, who is performing this action. He followed them into the tent, and he killed them, and the plague was halted. There was 24,000. That's last week's story. Now, next, turn over the page. Shem says to Moses, Pinchas, son of Elazar, son of Aaron, Kohen, reversed my anger from the children of Israel in his, I don't have a one-word translation for kinah. It's not jealousy, and zealousness is too general. It's, I heard this from my Rebbe on Shabbos. The definition of kinah is being so committed to something and so identified with something that you are prepared to take extreme measures to make it work, even executing people. It's like a top priority, and you are a person who executes as an action. It's not just a question of your values abstractly. That's what kinah is. He executed this event, says God, on my behalf. I could have done it. Under the circumstances, maybe I would have done it, but he did it in my place. Now the question arises, why? This is verse 11. Why does it go again give his lineage? We just had that on the previous page. In verse 7. 7 to 11 is 4 verses. I know we have attention span problems, but my goodness. Couldn't you expect that someone will remember when he turns the page who he is? Obviously, repeating the lineage is supposed to teach us something important. So Rashi gives an explanation. The explanation itself needs an explanation. He says that the princes of other tribes, after this event, after Pinchas killed Zimri and Cosby, were treating him with contempt, derision, disgrace, because they said, look, the whole assembly was there. Lots of great people. Only Pinchas was the one to execute him. Only he. They weren't party to the discussion between Pinchas and Moses. All they saw was Zimri comes with Cosby and presents her, and he goes off to his tent, and then Pinchas goes and kills them. And they think, if nobody else did it, it's a little funny that Pinchas did it. He's certainly not the greatest of the people who were there. There must be something in him. He's certainly not greatest. There must be something in him that's not so great, which moved him to do it, explains why he did it and the others didn't do it. And they found a candidate because he has 2 grandfathers. One grandfather is Aaron, the other grandfather is Yisro. And Yisro is not Jewish. He says, aha, there's the answer. his maternal grandfather is non-Jewish, and Midian is a culture that embodies aggressive, angry behavior. That's why he did it. And they used this sort of pulled down his action to reduce the status of his action. Let me say one more word, because I'm just setting the stage. Now, the commentators say the reason why the Torah gives his lineage again, not to identify who he is, not because maybe you forgot from the previous page, but because this repetition of lineage answers their claim. It answers their complaint. Now we'll have to figure out how it answers their complaint. Yes?
The Yitro part?
Sorry?
The Yitro part, I don't see that in the Torah. Is that for the oral tradition?
Oh, it's not on this page, but there's many pages that deal with, there's a whole Parsha called Yisro. And in that Parsha, he's coming to Israel, coming to the Jewish people is described, and his interaction with Moses and the others described, and where Elazar's marriage is described as being with the daughter of Yisro. So it's absolutely explicit. It's not in the oral, it doesn't have to be in the oral tradition. So now, and then the Pri Tzaddik adds another element here. All right, we're going to use his lineage going after Aaron to contradict what the other princes said. You're talking about his maternal grandfather. We're telling you it's his paternal grandfather. And the Maharal actually says, this is to teach you that his whole character was formed only from his paternal grandfather. That the maternal grandfather played no role whatsoever in his identity and his conduct. That's not obvious. It's not obvious, but it means that the princes who criticized him made a total mistake. They made a total mistake. No, it wasn't because of Yisro that he did it. It was only because of Aaron. That's what the Maharal says. The Pri Tzaddik disagrees with the Maharal, though I didn't see him quote the Maharal word for word, but he has a different understanding. He starts with the assumption that thinking that those princes made a wholesale mistake is also a weakness in an explanation. They weren't little people. They were great people. They were leaders. They were very knowledgeable. They were trying to serve God. So just to wipe out their statement as just a complete fantasy is a weakness in the explanation. So he explains it as he did have this inheritance from Midian, and it was an inheritance of aggressive action, the capacity to act aggressively, and the way anger would motivate someone to act. Yes, I took a step back. I didn't say he was angry. I said he acts the way anger would motivate a person to act. He has this power. And that does explain why he did it and the others didn't do it. But in his case, let's call it the angry response, is in service of his paternal grandfather, Aaron, who the theme of his life is peace. So the princes weren't totally wrong. It was his maternal grandfather's contribution to his character that explains why he did it and others didn't do it. But they were wrong in thinking that it did it alone. Both grandfather's influences on him were operative, and the major guiding motivation came from Aaron, who, as we know, and you must have heard a dozen times already, Aaron's whole attitude, his whole project in the world to bring peace between people, peace between God and the Jewish people. And it was that motivation, seeing this event of Zimri and Cosby causing a rupture between the Kodesh Baruch Hu and the Jewish people, and the behavior of the others, which caused a plague of 24,000 people, it was that rupture that he wanted to repair. Now, he repaired it by killing them, because there actually is a halacha of killing people who engage in this kind of behavior, especially when it's public in this way, while they're still in the middle of the performance of the crime. So they are right in what they saw, they're wrong in what they didn't see. And the lineage here is to come to tell us that this is the major purpose in his action. And that's why it says in verse 12, therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. Since he represents his grandfather, Aaron, and he represents peace, he's acting on behalf of peace, I give him my covenant of peace. Now, I don't know if I told you this all before, or I didn't tell you this all before, but at any rate. Now, I'm going to go a step further. The way I've set it up, Kodesh Baruch Hu caused them to not know the halacha in order to give Pinchas an opportunity to do this. Well, Pinchas must have been somebody special beforehand to earn that kind of consideration. What do we know about Pinchas beforehand? Many commentators tell us that before this incident, Pinchas was not a Kohen. Now, wait a minute. He's a grandson of Aaron. How could he not be a Kohen? So the explanation is this. When Aaron and his children were designated as Kohanim, the institution was set up in the following way. Aaron is the high priest, his 4 sons are priests, and all their future progeny will be priests, because the priesthood is inherited from father to son. The poor Pinchas was older. He was already born. So he's not Aaron, he's not Aaron's son, and he's not going to be born after the priesthood is set up. So he's excluded. That's one explanation. Another explanation for the same fact that he wasn't included is that Aaron and his sons were anointed with oil, and that's how they were inaugurated into the priesthood. But Pinchas was a minor, and you don't anoint with oil something which can't do the job for which the anointing is designated. So it would have to be done later. But a 2-stage anointment process is not in the cards. Either way, Pinchas grows up. My grandfather's a high priest. My father and his brothers are priests. All my cousins will be priests, and I'm out. Now let's just try to climb inside his head. Let's just try to think out his psychology. There's no explanation. He hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't committed any crime. He's the one with the black X on his forehead. Not you. All the rest of the family, but not you. How do you feel? It wouldn't be normal to feel rejected, discarded, out of place, inferior, somehow disqualified. When there is an attack on Moses' honor and Aaron's honor and the honor of the Jewish people, would you expect a person who for years has experienced himself as rejected and discarded to be the one to stand up for the honor of Moses and stand up for the honor of Aaron and to risk his life to try to salvage their honor? Would you expect him to be the one to do it? I think if he didn't, if he just sat on the side and said, okay, they're bigger people than I am, let them take care of it, we would understand it very well. In human terms, we would understand it very well. I think this gives us an insight into 1/100% of why HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to do this for him. Since he has the ability to identify with the good, the tov, the right, the just, the beautiful, the holy, and be willing to sacrifice himself for it, even though he's experiencing having been rejected, he's the one for whom I'm going to cause everyone else to forget and leave the knowledge with him, so that he's the one that should be able to do it. And he should trigger the recovery of that halacha. That great performance I'm setting up for him because of the kind of character that he shows. And I want to tell you a story that took place probably 70, 80 years ago, which illustrates this in our times, and how to look at people and try to appreciate them. Simcha Wasserman was a teacher here. He also was in America. He was in Detroit. Rabbi Wasserman's son. At a certain point, he was invited to set up a kollel in Los Angeles. So he and his Rebbe went out to Los Angeles, and he was promised that he would not have monetary responsibilities. Someone else would take care of the money, and he should attract the students and set up the curriculum and teach. And so it was for a while, but then the person who was raising the money, for one reason or another, stopped. So he had to take responsibility for the money also. It was very difficult. And it got worse and worse, till finally the Rebbe said, look, I'll go back to Detroit, and I'll pick up my old job, and I'll earn money, and I'll send some money to you, and you stay here and continue to try to make it work. So he agreed. She went back to Detroit. After several months, he called her up, and he said, it's not working. It's just not working. The debts are getting higher and higher. I don't think we can succeed. Now listen to what she said. She said, we don't have children. They never had children. So a woman without children. We don't have children. Who could go to Los Angeles to set up a kollel? Where would they educate their children? Maybe that's what we can do, and no one else can do because we don't have children. Stay. And in a few months it did recover, and she joined him in Los Angeles at that time. Now, a woman who doesn't have children, that can create great sadness, great disappointment, great grief, and also feelings of being discarded and abandoned. And then to volunteer, to think, okay, I don't have children. What can I do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu because I don't have children that people who do have children can't do? Looking at it as an opportunity to do something special. That's enormous. That's the spirit of Pinchas. It's taking, as my first wife used to say, taking your stumbling blocks and turning them into cornerstones of a building. The thing you're tripping over, the thing that's standing in your way, the thing that's holding you back, make that the platform on which you build your edifice. She looked at this and said, we don't have children. That's a tragedy. Tragedy? It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. What can we do because we don't have children? That's a gigantic, and I think that's the spirit that Pinchas exhibits, and what he contributes to the idea of how to serve the Kodesh Baruch Hu. When you have reverses, look for ways to turn that reverse into something positive. Are we together so far?
Yeah.
Okay, now the Pri Tzaddik wants to go on and say, look at what Pinchas did. This is the same idea, but in a different angle. He took what he got from Yisro, that aggressive, even prepared to be violent nature, and he looked for a way to use that. He looked for a way to elevate that, what the fancy psychologists would call sublimation. To incorporate it into serving Kodesh Baruch Hu, because it's part of his natural abilities, it's part of his natural character. So instead of canceling that and saying people shouldn't be aggressive, they shouldn't be angry, and they certainly shouldn't be violent, when the opportunity came, he tapped it because it's there, and he knew how to channel it. That's a characteristic of the highest resolution of conflict in a personality, things that you struggle with, elements in your character, your motivation, which lead you to make wrong decisions, and you struggle with it. The highest resolution is to channel it in a way where it can contribute to you positively, instead of just trying to oppose it. We spoke, I remember who I said this to, but tshuva from love and tshuva from fear and awe, crushing the contradicting character motivation rather than engaging the motivation. That's what Pinchas did, and that's what the Pri Tzaddik wants to learn as a general policy in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this requires a kind of spiritual sophistication. And it's something which you need to learn. You should ask people about it. And you could ask me, but maybe I'm the best person because you need people's psychological insight. When I spoke about this years and years ago, someone said to me, well, what about aggressive, very aggressive behavior? You know, yelling and shouting and arguing and so on and so on. How would you elevate that? How would you sublimate that? So I said, that's a good question. I'll go home and ask my wife, my first wife. And she said, become an advocate for victims. Oh, right. These are people who are victims. They're suffering injustice. Become an advocate for them. Then, when you use that aggressive nature to combat those who are victimizing them, you're using it well. You're using it appropriately. So I would say this is a kind of spiritual subtlety and a gift of understanding how to use the capabilities that you have and the resources that you have in the most, successful way, even if they are capabilities that are not of the normal type. I'll give you a couple of examples. These are not directly of negative motivations, but how a person used his understanding of the world to be able to get the most out of his resources. We give charity. There's a story of someone in Europe whose business was failing, and there was a wealthy man who was known to help people whose businesses were failing. So he went to him and he said, listen, I need whatever it was, some large sum of money to put my business back on its feet. Please lend me the money. And the wealthy person said, fine. And he lent him the money. It took 2 years, and the person's business recovered. And he came to pay the money back. And the wealthy man said to him, I don't want the money back. So the borrower said, listen, I wasn't looking for charity. I didn't ask for charity. I asked for help. You gave it to me. My business is recovered, and I want to pay it back. So the wealthy man said, no, I don't want it back. You look for people. Look for people whose businesses are failing. You look for someone who needs money to put his business back on its feet. And you lend it to him, and when he wants to pay it back, tell him to lend it to somebody else. Wow. Let's say it's $50,000. That $50,000 could go on until the Messiah comes. Because each one's going to give it to the next guy, assuming the business recovers. If the business is lost anyway, then the money will go down the drain. But it's a chain of business savings, not just one. And it doesn't die when he dies. It goes on. That's a remarkable idea. To get as much out of this $50,000 of charity as you possibly can, you save multiple businesses that way. Another fellow, Rabbi told me about this, in Germany. He took responsibility for people coming to the city for charity. By the way, German Jews, I don't know if anybody else does this, but once a year they have an auction. They auction off sweeping the shul, cleaning the windows, rearranging the books, doing the most menial chores, and they bid for it, and they pay for it. It's quite a remarkable idea that cleaning the shul is an honor, something you're doing for Hirsch Baruch Hu and for the community. So he undertook to be responsible for collecting charity in his town. I don't know how big the town was. He was well-to-do. He set up a suite in his house, which was the suite for charity collectors. And when they came, he put them in the suite, and he walked from house to house to collect the money. So they shouldn't have to walk from house to house and get the sometimes unfriendly reception. No, you sit here, relax, enjoy, and I'll collect the money for you and give it to you. Of course, his going around made a much bigger impression than they're going around as strangers. Now, you don't have to do that, but what an extraordinary thing it is to do. So people look for ways in which they can help. There's a very wealthy Australian, happens to be a Chabad Chassid. I'll think of his name. I can't get names when I want them. And he looked to use his money to help people who are in need to do what everybody else is doing, but they can't do it, and to make it easier for them. So he built a wedding hall over here in the. Oh, no, I'm not sitting at home. In Givat Shaul, a very beautiful wedding hall with 2 halls, and the amount of money you pay for a wedding there is about half of what you would pay someplace else. So it means people who don't have the resources, and it's a nice hall, and the food is good. It's nothing, it doesn't cut anything, because he set it up with charity. There's something here called a Beit Hachlama. I don't know whether people have this anywhere else in the world. We have a lot of children, Baruch Hashem. When a woman gives birth, there's a place where she can go with the baby and get rest. It's called like a place of rejuvenation. And you pay by day. So he said, I think it was, if you already have 3 children, I'll pay for 2 days. So if you have enough money for 2 days, she goes for 4 days. He adds 2 days to the vacation. These are people who are in monetary stress and looking for a way to be able to help them. There were years on the yard side of the Lubavitcher Rebbe where he would invite 1,000 Russian immigrant children and give them tefillin. There was a big meeting at the wall with 1,000 kids. A good pair of tefillin can cost $1,000. 1,000 kids, 1,000 pairs of tefillin. You do the calculation. It's a lot of money. These kids will never forget that. They come from homes where they wouldn't get it from their parents. Parents wouldn't give it to them. And they're there with 1,000 kids. So he was looking for things to do that will make an impact. Now, again, this is extraordinary, and it's not something that everybody should do. But we should take a lesson from this to think about not the verb of what we do only, but the adverb as well. And I'll give you an application which you can all put into practice. The mitzvah of charity in the Torah is expressed twice in 2 different ways. One is, lo sichpos es yadcha, don't tighten your fist to hold on to your money. And lo ametz es levavcha, don't. Lo sichpos es yadcha, and don't harden your heart. So when you learn how to think Jewishly, you think, you already told me to give the money, don't harden my fist. What do you mean not to harden my heart?
Hesed.
Sorry?
Hesed.
I don't know, hear you.
Hesed.
Yeah, but you're giving the money, isn't that the chesed?
No, I'm saying harden your heart, meaning hesed.
Yeah, but you might have thought that if he would tell you to do charity by saying don't harden your heart, he said, don't harden your heart, have a soft heart and give charity. The purpose of not hardening your heart is to give the charity. But when you have a separate verse that says to give the charity, then the verse that tells you not to harden your heart isn't just telling you to give the charity, it's telling you something else. It's a question of how you give the charity. How do you give the charity? Maybe 100 years ago, in Yerushalayim, when a person asked for charity, he used to say, Zechei bi, earn merit through me. I'm giving you the opportunity to do a mitzvah. And the giver should say, thank you, you're doing me a favor, you're giving me an opportunity to do a mitzvah. And if that sounds extravagant, let me remind you of a biblical incident, which probably most of you know. The 3 travelers. The 3 travelers come, and Abraham sitting at the flap of his tent. He sees them, he runs to them, and he invites them to come sit under the tree. I'll prepare food for you. And the word he says in Hebrew is ve'ekcha fas lechem. I will take a chunk of bread. Unfortunately, I think the article translates morsel. Morsel in English means a crumb. He wasn't offering a crumb to 3 people. Pas can be a chunk of bread. It could be quite large. But the word he uses, ve'ekcha, I will take. I said, wait a second, isn't he offering it to give it to them? Isn't that the point? You're going to take it and put it in a box and hold it? Of course not. So the English, under pressure, translates, I will fetch. Isn't fetch clever? Because fetch means go, get, bring, and give. That's what fetch means. So the ekcha part is going and getting. And then you make it into a fetch, so then you can hand it over to somebody else. But ekcha in Hebrew doesn't mean fetch. It means take. So some commentators explain as follows. Abraham says, I'm going to provide you with a meal. Don't think I'm making a mistake. I know that when I provide you with a meal, you get the physical food and I get the mitzvah. And in this transaction, I'm getting more than you are. So I regard myself as a taker, not a giver. You don't owe me anything. You don't owe me any gratitude. Because in the transaction, I'm already getting more than I'm giving you. And this very same idea is expressed by a single word where Kodesh Baruch Hu solicits, so to speak, contributions to make the tabernacle. And he says, tell the Jewish people, v'yichchu li truma. They should take from me a contribution. In context, of course, it doesn't mean that the Jews should take the money that they have and put it in the bank or invest it in AT&T. It means hand it over to the construction of the tabernacle. But why does it say take? So there too, it's the same. By the way, the Sforno was so bothered by this that he says that he's speaking to the tax collectors, that they should take it from the people, because it means take. But others explain it as follows. God says to the people, let's see what's going on here. You're going to give money, and you're going to get Shriyas Ashchina, God's presence in your midst. Is it worth it, do you think? Are you losing out in the transaction? No, you're gaining a great deal in the transaction. That being the case, realize that when you hand over your money, you're a taker, you're not a giver. I'm not asking you to sacrifice anything. You're not losing anything. Be sort of like somebody says, what do you do with your money? I've got it invested in IBM. Oh, I feel so sorry for you. Why do you feel sorry for me? Because if it's invested in IBM, you can't spend it. I said, listen, keep your charity for somebody else. I'm earning 16% a year. I'm spending the interest. Don't worry about me. I'm doing fine. Here, you're investing in Shriyas Ashchina. And what does the Torah say? V'asuli mikdash, should create a holy place for me. V'shachanti b'socham, via my manifesting my presence in the tabernacle, I'm going to take up my presence in each of you, in your hearts. That's surely worth more than the money that you're giving to me. So, when someone asks you for charity, you should try to make him feel like he's doing you a favor. Say to him, you're helping me do a mitzvah. I thank you for the opportunity to do the mitzvah. If you do that, then you're supplying the adverb. You're not hardening your heart, you're softening your heart. If you have a few minutes, you could even offer to talk to him, because these people, they have only hello and goodbye the whole day long. That means to make the chesed into more than just handing over money. So this is part of the spiritual sense of the Jewish people. If there's one gift that we have, that's a gift that's unique to the Jewish people, it's a gift of creating this special level of spirituality, the way we perform a mitzvah to relate to the world, to Kodesh Baruch Hu, to ourselves, and that's what we learn. One of the things we learn from Pinchas, yes?
Should you or should you not assess the state of a person that's asking you for tzedakah? There's an intuition in me that if you see somebody that looks like they might be using drugs and is asking you for money, it might not be a good thing to give that person money. But at the same time, you never know who's going to be using it correctly and who's not going to be using it correctly. So do you have an obligation to try to figure that out? Or is it better to just give tzedakah to whoever is asking?
So this is a very important question. And the way in which it's handled sometimes is this. The Gemara actually says this. Thank God for the phonies.
Thank God for the what?
Phonies. People who are asking for money but they don't really need it. Because the mitzvah of tzedakah is to take a poor person and make him no longer poor. That's not $5. if you have money in your charity account and he needs $3,000 to put him out of the class of the poor, you'd have to give him all $3,000. But that obligation applies only when he's sincere, when it's really true. Now, and we don't always know. Now, you talk about having an obligation, make an investigation. Many cities in the world have a committee which issues a certificate for people who are coming to collect charity that they have investigated the cause and found out that it's legitimate, precisely for this reason. Now, usually, it's a joint effort, and you don't have to personally satisfy. But you don't want to be giving money to people who don't deserve it. And the way you put it, I think, is very important, and it applies across the board. If you think about it more deeply, you give the person who's going to use it for drugs, you're hurting him. You're actually hurting him. The mitzvah of tzedakah is to benefit somebody, make his life better, not to hurt him. Now you say, okay, he's not going to use it for drugs, but he's going to use it for things because he doesn't really need it. Yeah, but you're reinforcing his habit of asking for it because it's successful and taking more money from other poor people. So that also is injurious. And because he's costing money from other poor people, he's injuring them, he's injuring himself also, because he's committing a crime. So in both ways, you're saving him, you're not really benefiting him when you do that. But it's not practical to investigate everybody who comes to you. So let's say if you live in one of these towns, and I don't know what the state, because the other thing to do is to give charity through people who have charity funds. I mean, every Hasidic Rebbe has a charity fund. Many Rosh Yeshiva have a charity fund. They will carry out the investigation and they'll give it to the right people. Now, you don't want to say no to someone who puts out his hand. That's not good for you either. But then you can give him 2 shekels, 3 shekels, 5 shekels. That's just that you shouldn't become cold-hearted and disregarding of someone who puts out of his hand. And he knows that that's what he can expect because he's not presenting any bona fides. And he's not, you're just a Yeshivat Ohr. How much money do you have? You probably have a grand total of assets of minus $2,000, and they can't ask you for much. But the adverb, that's what I'm stressing here, is to do the mitzvah to do kindness in a kind way, not just that the bottom line is the kindness that comes out. Yeah.
What are some of the consequences of the Shekhinah dwelling or not dwelling amongst us? What does that look like?
Okay, that's a large topic, and we're already a little bit behind time. I'll just say one thing. There are verses that describe what happens when you go up to the temple on the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And there's a word there, Yud Resh Aleph Hey, which is either read Yireh, which means he will see, or Yereh means he will be seen. And one of the commentators say this: you come to the temple, you present yourself in the courtyard of the temple to be seen by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then he gives you a vision of how he sees you. You see what you look like in his eyes. That's worth an infinity of money, because that's what you really are. That's what you really are. Now, I wouldn't say it's all of what you are, and maybe it was too painful to have a vision of what you are. Maybe those parts are left out. But you get an opportunity for a clarity that you otherwise wouldn't possess. That in itself is a gigantic benefit. Tosfos says that you see the way the Kohanim carry out the service, and you learn what it means to be, in a certain sense, at least for certain periods, full-time in God's service. You learn from them what kind of, you see how they do it. You see what their feelings are and their attitudes are, and you learn what it means to really have awe for Hashem. There are many things that this gives. Do you have a question? No. Okay. All right. Tomorrow, hopefully, we'll pick up.